Good morning, everyone. How you doing? Are we all awake? Yeah, are we all alive? Good. Well, my name is Jon Jorgenson, and I am really excited to be here all week with you all. I truly am, even though some of you back there, I can't even see you, but I believe by faith that you are there and that you are with me as well. I'm really excited to be here all week. I'm excited to get to know you all a little bit better. Real quick before we start, I thought I would give you a chance to get to know me a little bit better in case you don't know me. So I am a teacher and a YouTuber. I am that much of a basic 20-something. I have a YouTube channel, that's right. You can subscribe at Jon Jorgenson. Around 4 years ago, I decided to start my own ministry, and half of that ministry exists on my YouTube channel, where I produce different spoken word poems, I do Bible study curriculum, short sermons, things like that. And then the other half of that ministry involves me traveling around the country to speak at different churches or camps or conferences or to attractive, talented, smart college students like you all here today. And this specific engagement here with you all at Spiritual Enrichment Week, this is actually a really special opportunity for me for many different reasons, and we'll get into that. But one of the reasons is because I actually grew up not too far from here. I grew up in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Yes, shouts to Crystal Lake. I went to Crystal Lake South High School, where yes, here we go Gators. In fact, I bet you didn't know this, but I was actually voted class of 2009's most spirited, which is still my proudest achievement to this day. So that's what you have to look forward to. And now, actually, today, still, my wife and I, we live not too far from here. We live in a neighborhood called Avondale, which is just north of downtown Chicago. And so I actually live just a short drive up the highway from here, or at least it should be a short drive if there weren't so much traffic. Y'all ever sit in traffic on 90? The worst. That traffic, it is not of God, okay? I just want to vent a little bit. Okay, so I have this app on my phone, right? It's called Waze. Anyone ever use Waze? Okay, Waze, y'all can give God a praise for Waze this morning because Waze saved my life today. So I have driven out to Elgin enough to know that generally it takes me about 40 minutes to get from my front door to the exit at 90 and Route 31. And so I, this morning, was planning on leaving about 40 minutes before I needed to get here. I'd be right on time, we'd be Gucci. But Waze has this cool feature where you can actually do a planned trip. You ever do one of these? Those of you who think ahead, you do planned trips. What you do is you input where you want to go and what time you want to get there. And Waze, knowing the traffic patterns, will send you a notification when you should leave your house in order to be on time. And so luckily, I had a planned trip this morning to get here because 35 minutes before I was planning on leaving, Waze sends me a notification that says, please leave now to arrive at Judson University on time. Your ETA is 1 hour and 15 minutes from now. I don't know how many math majors we have in the room, but that is almost double the amount of time I thought it was going to take me to get here. So the only reason I'm here is because God used Waze in a powerful way to bring me on this stage, okay? But have you ever had anything like that in your life? You ever have anything in your life that just took you way longer than you thought it was going to take you? Maybe it was a drive because of traffic, or maybe you've had like a paper or a project due for a class, and you were like, this will take me 1 hour, 2 hours tops. And so you put it off, and you put it off, and then you have to stay up until 4 a.m, the night before it's due, because it took you way longer than you thought. Or how about this? Did anyone have to run the mile in high school? Okay, every semester in high school, we had to run a timed mile. And in my arrogance, I would always think, come on, it's just 1 mile. Like, I can knock out those 4 laps in like 6 minutes, 30 seconds, 7 minutes tops. Then 5 minutes later, I've only done 1 lap, and I feel like I'm going to die, you know? Always took me longer to run the mile than I thought. Our theme for this Spiritual Enrichment Week is forward. And what we're talking about is this idea that we all have areas in our lives where we want to move forward. We all want to make progress, right? Some of you play a sport here. Maybe how you want to move forward is you want to start. Or you want to be a starter on your team. Or maybe you want to make all conference this season or next season. For others of you, you might be a senior and you want to move forward like to graduation and get out of here, right? Others of you, you're single and you want to move forward into a relationship. You don't need to raise your hand right now. Don't be that desperate. It's not going to work. But we all have these areas in our lives, and not only do we want to move forward, but we want to move forward as quickly as possible, don't we? You see, we see the life that we want, and we as humans, we want to get to that life as quickly and as easily as we possibly can. But the question that I want us all to consider this morning is, what do you do when God doesn't move you forward fast, right? What do you do when that thing that you want or the thing that you've been working towards doesn't come as quickly or as easily or in the way that you thought it would? Really, the question that I want us to ask ourselves this morning is, what do you do when God takes you the long way? What do you do when you feel that God has called you to something? And maybe you even stepped out in faith and you began to move forward with Him, but then God isn't doing His part. God isn't delivering on the promises that He gave you right away. Or God isn't bringing you where you thought you should be as quickly or as easily as you wanted. What do you do when it feels like God's taken you on a bit of a detour? And all week, we are going to be studying and looking at 2 chapters in the book of Exodus, where God is trying to move His people forward. And He does this in several very unconventional ways. And today, we look at a passage where God takes His people the long way. He takes them literally through a desert. In the passage we're about to read, God takes His people through the wilderness. And my prayer for you in the rest of the time that we have together is that you might be able to see this, that you might be able to see that even though sometimes God takes us the long way, God does not waste your wilderness. That's what I want you to walk out of these doors believing. Some of you walked in here this morning, and if you're honest with yourself, you sort of feel like you're just sort of wandering through this school year. You're just sort of wandering through life without any purpose, without any direction. Some of you feel like God is sort of taking you the scenic route. And what I'm going to try and show you in these next few moments is that even if you feel like God is taking you the long way, He's not going to waste that wilderness. So, if you have your Bibles, good for you. If not, I'm going to read it to you. But bring those out and open up to Exodus chapter 13. In Exodus chapter 13, we find God's people, otherwise known as the Israelites. And the Israelites, they are about to escape from Egypt, right? And where they have been held as slaves for generations. They've been in captivity. But God, He has promised to deliver them from slavery, to free them, and to lead them to the promised land, right? Some of you are familiar with this story. But right at the beginning of their journey, in Exodus chapter 13, God throws a detour at them. In Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, it says this: "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt." Now, before I go on, I want to show you just how much of a detour God took His people on. We have a map right up here that we're going to throw on the screen. And over there, sort of on your left side, we see Egypt, right? And way over on the right, near sort of like Moab, up there you see like Jericho. That's around where the promised land was. And the brown line at the top, up by the Mediterranean Sea, if you can see that brown line, that's the road they could have taken. So you can see, there was a direct route. Like there was an interstate. There was an Elon Musk boring tunnel that could have taken them directly to the promised land. But instead, what did God do? Instead, God took them on the red line. And the red line went sort of east for a little while, then cut back and decided to basically jump an entire sea, then go all the way far south, back up, back down south, scoop around, back east, and in the back door. Instead, God took them the long way. Now, you remember before how I was talking about my obsession with Waze? I wish Waze would sponsor my preaching. Seriously, because I love giving them shout outs because they really do help me so much. Let me show you how obsessed I am with Waze. So I have lived in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, pretty much my entire life. I know the city of Chicago backwards and forwards. I drove Uber in Chicago for years. If you tell me where you want to go in Chicago, I can tell you the fastest route to get there. I know that city. But even though I know Chicago so well, I still use Waze every time I get in the car. Because every now and then, Waze will give me a route that I know makes no sense at all. Like, I know this city enough that there's a much quicker route I could have taken. There's a much more direct route I could have gone. And I know that Waze is actually taking me way out of the way. But even though I know that, I still do what Waze tells me to do. Why? Well, one, because we trust technology too much. The robots are coming, they're going to kill us all. But more than that, I do what the GPS tells me to do because the GPS knows more than I do. The GPS knows that on the route that I thought I should have taken, there's traffic. There's an accident. There's a roadblock. And the GPS knows that if I had gone the route that I thought was better, the route that I thought would be easier, the route that I thought was more comfortable, then I actually would have been driven directly into a trap. You see, sometimes God will take you the long way to protect you. He'll take you the long way to protect you from what you would have run into had you gone your way. We see this with the Israelites. It literally says in the text that if they had taken the more direct route, then they would have fallen into war. And they would have lost that war, and they would have been sent back to slavery. God took them the long way, and it didn't make sense to them, but he was doing it to protect them. Now, back to the text. We read, when Pharaoh let the people go, God didn't lead them along the road through the Philistine country, though it was shorter, because God is protecting them. Then, in verse 18, it says this. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. A little Bible trivia question here. What happened at the Red Sea? Who took Old Testament survey? What happened at the Red Sea? God parted it, right? At the Red Sea, God parted the waters. At the Red Sea, God taught his people how to trust him for their protection. If you remember on the map, the Israelites on the route that they went, they dipped really far south at one point, didn't they? And they stopped at a place called Mount Sinai. Does anyone remember what God gave his people at Mount Sinai? He gave them the 10 Commandments. Now, we like to think of the 10 Commandments as like the basic rules of Christianity, like the no-does of sin, right? But actually, you have to remember that these rules were originally given to people who were slaves. These were people who thought of themselves as property. They had no idea how to be human. And so at Mount Sinai, God taught his people not only how to be human, but here is how you live as my people. Along the way, as they were going the long way, they got pretty hungry. And so what did God do? He provided manna or bread from heaven each and every day to teach his people that they could trust him for their provision. So I hope you're starting to see that even though God took them the long way, along the way, God was actually showing them who he was. Along the way, God was teaching them the things that they would need to know so that when they got to the promised land, they'd be ready to live there. You see, sometimes God will take you the long way to protect you. But other times, God will take you the long way to prepare you. Does anyone follow one of those couples on Instagram? You know what couples I'm talking about. Like the ones where you look at them and they are so adorable, and they are so in love, and they are so couple goals, I just can't even do anything right now. Like, it makes you kind of sick, doesn't it? But how many of us have spent time looking at those photos, and as much as we tell people that it's sick and disgusting, secretly in our hearts we're like, well, why don't I have that yet? How many of us look at something that other people have, whether it's a relationship or whether it's money or whatever it is, and we say, why don't I have that yet? Why hasn't God brought me there yet? Why don't I have that relationship yet? And what I want to challenge you with today is I want to challenge you to, instead of spending your time asking, God, why haven't you delivered this yet? Why don't you ask yourself, how might God be using this season right now to prepare me so that when it does come along, I'll be ready? That relationship that you have spent so much time praying for, it might take a little longer than you thought. It might take a little bit longer than you wanted it to or that you were comfortable with, but I promise you, if you go God's way, you'll be ready for it when it does. You see, God does not waste our wilderness. Sometimes He takes us the long way, but He does it to protect us. He does it to prepare us. And I want you to know, I have seen this so powerfully in my life, because for me, I want you to see this. For me, when I was 13 years old, I went to a summer camp. And at that summer camp, a speaker just like me showed up and talked about God's plan for my life, and how part of that plan was for me to have a relationship with God through His Son, Jesus. And I told you that this was a really special gig for me this week, because that summer camp, it actually happened right here on this campus. And when I was 13 years old, after I heard that, right outside of this chapel, on that bench right out there under that tree, when I was 13 years old, I sat on that bench and I said yes to Jesus for the first time. For the first time, I said yes to God's plan for my life. But I also want you to know that the path from that bench to this stage, the path from that bench at 13 years old to this stage at 27 years old, that has not been a direct path. I want you to know that I know what it is like firsthand for God to take you the long way. Because yes, while at 13 years old, I said yes to Jesus, because I never took that decision very seriously, and because I never surrounded myself with a good Christian community, by the time I was 17 years old, I was stuck deep in a pit of lust and lying because I had developed an addiction to pornography. And so I was stuck here. But then thankfully, due to God's grace and Him using people in my life, by the time I was 18, I was free from that addiction. And I began telling my story. Yeah, I began traveling around and I began telling people of the healing work that God had done in my life. And at that point I thought, okay, it's going to be smooth sailing from here, right? Direct route. But when I was 21 years old, I went through a really terrible breakup with a girl who I was certain we were going to get married. And so I went through a season of deep depression and anger with God because I thought He had promised me something. I thought He had promised me that we were going to be together, and then it was gone. But thankfully, over the next few years, me and that girl, we worked really, really hard to rebuild our relationship, not only with each other, but also to rebuild our relationship with God. And at 24 years old, me and that girl got married. And also at 24 years old, I said yes to God's calling for my life. And a half. You see, I was in a very successful job right out of college. I was making a lot of money. I was doing really great. But I felt this calling from God on my life to leave that successful job and to start this ministry where I would travel around and I would teach people about God's plan for their life. And I would make these YouTube videos to encourage people to move forward in their faith. But then for all of last year, for almost all of 2018, friends, I felt like I was wandering around. Because while I had said yes to God's plan for my life, a year and a half in, I felt like I was going nowhere. Because I had an idea of what being a professional speaker or what being a YouTuber or an influencer would be like. And at that point, I thought I would have more followers. I thought I'd be speaking at big conferences. But I wasn't there yet, and it just made no sense, so I just felt like I was wandering. Now I'm here. That is not a direct route. That is not the easiest or quickest or most direct route that I could have taken. Y'all, I want you to know that when I was 13 years old, I had no idea that this was going to be God's plan for my life. And to be honest, at 13 years old, this is probably not the path that I would have chosen. It's been really difficult at times. But I also want you to know that I wouldn't change this. I wouldn't change it because I have watched along the way as God has actually protected me from even worse things. I've watched along the way as God prepared me for even better things than I ever imagined. And I believe that ultimately, God took me the long way to place me. I believe God took me the long way to place me on this stage as a living testament to you all that God does not waste your wilderness. I want you to know this morning that I have walked through the wilderness with God. I have felt totally lost. I have felt like he was taking me on this long detour, but I have also watched as God did not waste a single step of my journey, and I do not believe he is going to waste a single step of yours either. But you have to be willing to say yes to God's plan. God is going to use his journey, his way, to prepare you. He's going to use it to protect you. And ultimately, he's going to use it to place you in his will. And I wonder where God might place you. I wonder what good placement God might have for you in your life if you would just be willing to pray a simple prayer. And that prayer is this: I will give God control of the course. Are you willing to pray that this morning? Are you willing to pray that over your relationship with this school? Maybe some of you, you're feeling real anxious because you just got a lot of work to do right now in class. Or maybe, I don't know, you don't have a major yet. Or you're not even sure how you're going to pay for next semester. Are you willing to give God control of that? Are you willing to trust him? Others of you, you are struggling with depression or anxiety, or there's just some mental health thing that's going on, and you have been trying to fix it yourself. You've been trying to fix it by ignoring it, by pretending it doesn't exist. You've been trying to fix it through substances every weekend. You've been trying to fix it through self-harm. Are you willing to trust that God can control the path towards healing for you? And still, I imagine there are others of you, even though you sit in chapel all the time, even though you go to a Christian school, maybe you even grew up in a Christian home, you have never given God control over the course of your life. You've never actually said yes to Jesus. And so wherever it is for you this morning, I want to give us a moment here to respond. Wherever it is you feel like you've been wandering, I want to encourage you that if you say yes to God's path, He's not going to waste that wandering. He's not going to let you wander forever, but He's going to use the journey to protect you, to prepare you, and ultimately to place you exactly where He wants you.